Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Innerarity. I am Chair Artificial Intelligence and Democracy at the European University Institute in Florence, where we investigate on the relationships between artificial intelligence, digitalization, and politics and democracy. 2 years ago, UNESCO commissioned me to write a report about this relationship to complement the one they have written a few years ago on the ethics of artificial intelligence, because they understood, and I completely agree, that it was an approach that was not the democratic or the political approach that was not covered by the report of ethics, what is quite a different thing than politics. In my report, I focus on the two fundamental issues of democracy. Democracy is about two things, conversation and decision-making. Democracy requires quality conversation and involves a decision-making process or system that can be considered popular, sovereignty, self-determination, whether through representation, legitimacy, or accountability. More direct, more indirect, but always as decisions that we somehow make our own. In this panel, I will focus on the first element, conversation, which today largely takes place on social media. We often tend to, when we are talking about the threats to democracy, we tend to focus on the fact that democracy is threatened by foreign interference in electoral processes or the action of bots. And we fail, in my opinion, to question the structural conditions that are at the root of the low quality democratic conversation. Let's say poor, polarized conversation without sufficient participation, well-informed accountability, etc. On this point of view, the weakness of the public sphere lies not only in the deliberative, intentional desire of others to interfere, but also in the very configuration of the digital environment, which favors impoverishing phenomena. The very openness of the space for free discussion allows ideas to be disseminated without the slightest justification. The proliferation of news and opinions creates a specific disorientation, very significant in terms of political participation and conscience. And the anonymity of some social networks generates a peculiar responsibility in interventions. Accessibility often implies hackability, etc. Of course, there are intentional distortions of public space, but we should not lose sight of the fact that much of the poor quality of our public spaces is due to the fact that the logic with which the new digital environment has been configured largely conditions the way we relate or communicate. Although the internet was welcomed as it really was an agent of democratization, today it evokes dynamics in the opposite direction. In recent years, the internet has become filled with negative connotation from the point of view of its democratic significance. The phenomenon of disinformation, fake news, and hate speech, in principle, more easily spread in the digital space than in analog spaces, is also a worrying phenomenon from the point of view of the damage it does to the public sphere that democracies need. This concern has led to the creation of tools for verifying opinions and news items, which by detecting obvious falsehoods, contribute to greater objectivity in collective discourse and discussion. However, it will be my first remark, the valuable contribution of those engaged in fact-checking should not lead us to believe that evidence will prevail and that fake news will cease to be disseminated in the digital space, thanks to the fact-checkers. Among other things, this limited effectiveness of fact-checking is due to the fact that a collective conversation refers only to a small extent to objectivity and to a greater extent to the way in which humans interpret reality in a pluralistic society. Today, we are witnessing a process that could be called the platformization of democracy, whereby a significant part of our conversation takes place on platforms that, while enable it, also condition in a various way. Reflecting today on the technological infrastructure of democracy requires examining why what had been celebrated as an open, ownerless space has turned out to be a limited space with owners. It's true that the digital giants have been very successful in presenting themselves as mere neutral intermediaries, but this neutrality has been believed both by their control over access and use and by their prescription of content. There is a tension, a dilemma between freedom of expression and content moderation on social media, which today seems to have settled on an information liberalism that makes the free flow of information a real political project and rejects any limitation. Platforms must accept some form of content regulation because they do not fulfill the properties with which they unfairly adorn themselves, neutrality and quality. Firstly, platforms are not completely neutral in relation to the content that circulates on them, but have a certain responsibility for what they claim to simply host. They are not mere transmitters, although they are not publishers in the traditional sense either. And therefore, the power of moderation will have to take on new forms in this new scale, digital scale. I am not just referring to the expulsion of certain users, as Twitter did with Trump, but to what extent the architecture of the medium favors certain expressions, making them more visible than others and even making them go viral. It is an illusion to think that there is such a thing as the neutral and democratic ranking, spontaneous popularity resulting from the mere choice of internet users. We could call digital populism the assumption that rank in the digital universe is due exclusively to the spontaneity of the free circulation of information and opinions. Platforms also fail to deliver on the promise of quality. The formal right to freedom of expression does not guarantee equality in public discussion. Public communication has not taken the egalitarian, public, and free form that was hoped for. Access to visibility is very unequally distributed. Debate seems to be subject to the law, to the strangers, and those who control the architecture of the new spaces for discussion are private actors who have not submitted their values and criteria to public discussion. Many of the problems that content moderation aims to solve could be addressed by better design. Improving social networks is not simply a matter of allowing unrestricted formal access of, or even removing content that is deemed undesirable. It requires a balance in freedom and moderation according to shared criteria and with a design that favors a truly democratic conversation. My conclusion, the power of moderation and sanctions is nowadays in the hands of the likes of private actors who own the platforms. It's all very well for the platforms themselves to create boards to oversee the moderation and content, but this raises a number of democratic issues. I have no time here to address. Oversight should be designed in a way to be truly independent, transparent, providing reasoned explanations for decisions. We also need a right of appeal because freedom of communication requires a certain democratic control and social criticism of the actors to guide these choices. As with the power in general, there is no democracy without the possibility of controlling those in power, algorithms, but also the moderator. Thank you very much.